It has been nearly 1 year since the state of Texas enacted one of the strictest abortion laws in the country. It banned abortions as early as 6 weeks and empowered private citizens from even outside of the state of Texas to sue abortion providers or anyone who helps a woman obtain an abortion. And that law has had massive ripple effects. There are now women waiting 2 or even 3 weeks for abortion appointments in 8 states surrounding Texas. A new study found 45% of Texans who traveled out of state for abortions once that law was passed made their way to Oklahoma's 4 clinics. And then, as the Washington Post reports, Oklahoma lawmakers started passing a flurry of anti-abortion legislation in reaction to the surge of Texas patients. In fact, lawmakers in Oklahoma just gave final approval to a bill modeled after the Texas ban, prohibiting abortions after about 6 weeks of pregnancy when cardiac activity can be detected. Oklahoma's Republican Governor Kevin Stitt is expected to sign the bill into law within days. And if you're thinking, hey, wait, didn't Governor Stitt just sign a bill that would make performing an abortion a felony in Oklahoma, punishable by up to 10 years in prison? Well, the answer is yes. Yes, he did about 2 weeks ago. But that measure, it isn't going into effect until late this summer, and it's likely going to face big legal challenges. But the new bill that just got passed this week, it has an emergency provision in it, so it takes effect as soon as Governor Stitt signs it. So it's important to note, as we see a growing number of states passing anti-abortion legislation, a majority of Americans, though, remain supportive of reproductive freedoms. Take a look at this poll from Pew Research. 62% of women and 56% of men think abortion should remain legal. And let's not forget the backdrop here. All of these laws are being passed as we await the highly anticipated Supreme Court decision on abortion expected in just a few months this summer. Joining me now to talk about these bills and the massive Supreme Court decision looming over America is my good friend Joyce Phang. She's an MSNBC legal contributor, a former federal prosecutor, and a professor at the University of Miami School of Law. So, Joyce, let's talk about how this, University of Alabama, say Texas.
That's right, Alabama.
I said Alabama,
yeah.
Right? So let's talk about how this Texas abortion law seems to be the template for so many other states. Why has it not faced sufficient, very stringent legal challenges to kind of dissuade all these other states from trying to follow suit?
So that's exactly the right question to start with. And the answer is the Supreme Court, with 3 justices appointed by the former president, President Trump, who used abortion as a litmus test issue for his justices. Roe versus Wade is still the law of the land in this country. And if you follow Roe versus Wade, then it should have been easy for the Texas law to be rendered unconstitutional. But that's not the approach that the Supreme Court took when the Texas law was decided on their shadow docket. They instead made the decision to let it remain in effect because of this rogue vigilante enforcement provision. The state of Texas says, we're not enforcing this law. It's just up to private citizens to do our dirty work. And that's how the law passed muster, at least in the eyes of the majority on the court. We'll find out what Roe's fate will be when the court decides Dobbs, the Mississippi case, later this term. But the activity or the lack of activity in the Texas case is a strong signal.
So SCOTUS sent what was almost like a siren song for all of these states, Texas, Florida, Oklahoma, for example, to race, because that's what they're doing, right? They're racing to the finish line to get these types of anti-abortion laws on the books before maybe end of June when we have that decision from SCOTUS and Dobbs. Why? What's the importance of having a state law on the books before something happens to Roe?
It's a race to the bottom, a race to see who can be the most restrictive, because if, as many analysts believe, the Supreme Court reverses Roe outright, that'll mean whatever state laws you have on the books will be permissible. It's perhaps more likely that the court won't do an outright reversal, that it'll do something slightly more restrictive, perhaps authorize abortion at the 15-week mark that Dobbs, the Mississippi case, tries to impose, as opposed to where it is right now at viability around 23 weeks. So if the court does that, if it takes that middle path, that means laws that are more restrictive than currently permissible laws will go into effect. And a lot of states have those laws waiting on the books already. States that don't have them are rushing to pass them. In Oklahoma, for instance, as you point out, multiple laws, right? Because they want to make sure that they have laws on the books that overlap, that take out any gaps and make it as difficult as possible for people to obtain abortion services.
So let's talk about this idea that perhaps in June, in the Dobbs case, we don't see a wholesale overturning of Roe v. Wade. Perhaps we see a chipping away of that precedent, which Roe v. Wade says abortion is legal in the United States. Is that a win? If you're a proponent for that type of maintenance and respect for the precedent of law, is it a win if it only chips away and doesn't wholesale overturn Roe?
Roe is a precedent that's been in place for 50 years. Like all major decisions in its area, it's a compromise decision about individual rights, but that has been the law. And this wholesale overturning of existing case law is something that's not consistent with our rule of law system, and it's dangerous. It's not a win for anybody. Let me give you an example, Katie. Voting rights provides a good example for this. When the Supreme Court made a decision that instead of outright reversing the Voting Rights Act, it would just gut it. It took all the teeth out of the Voting Rights Act, so it couldn't be enforced. That's why we're in the state that we're in with voting. It's possible that the court will do something very similar in this area with abortion, not reversing Roe outright, which would create a political firestorm, simply gutting Roe and the protections that have been in place for women for the last 50 years.
Well, speaking of protections, we're going to listen to what an Ohio state representative said this week during a hearing on a bill there that would ban abortion in the state if the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. Let's take a quick listen here.
Rape is a difficult issue, and it emotionally scars the individual, all or in part, for the rest of their life, just as child abuse does. But if a baby is created, it is a human life. And whether that mother ends that pregnancy or not, the scars will not go away. Period. It is a shame that it happens. But there's an opportunity for that woman, no matter how young or old she is, to make a determination about what she's going to do to help that life be a productive human being. She can choose to raise the child. She can choose to give that child to a loving family member or to give it to someone else. And that child can grow up and be something magnificent.
So, Joyce, there's no exception for rape or incest, as in many of the laws here. I mean, as you can imagine, that soundbite that just we heard, it's understandably turning a lot of heads. But to ban all abortions, even those for rape or incest victims, feels extreme to me and legally unsupportable.
It does feel extreme and legally unsupportable, in addition to reprehensible, right? Because these are people who will force a 12-year-old to have a baby, but won't provide medical services or early education or job training. But making the effort to set that aside for the moment as they continue to label themselves pro-life, we have to face the issue of whether these statutes that have no exception can pass. For one thing, I think it's unlikely that the Ohio legislature enacts this statute. You've pointed out that an overwhelming majority of Americans, frankly, continue to favor some access to abortion services, and rape and incest are among the most compelling cases. If this bill were by some chance to pass, it would face immediate and strong challenges and perhaps would go too far even for this conservative Supreme Court.
Well, Joyce, that means we'd see legal challenges, which means the members of the judiciary are critical for decisions. And you talk about the members of legislatures making a decision as to whether or not they should be challenged or not. And that's going to lead us to a later segment about the importance of who actually is in charge, who gets elected to the positions. Joyce Vance, as always, thank you for being with me on set.
Thanks
I appreciate
for having me, Katie.